And I'll begin. My name is David Du Bois. I'm adjunct faculty at Kent State in the College of Business. And I'd like to welcome you all here. Let me first begin by going over a little housekeeping announcement. So we really enjoy your participation. So it's great to leave video on if you're not doing something distracting in the background. It's really great to see how people are interacting, particularly for our speaker. But we do ask you to go on mute so that there's not distracting sound. But the great way to participate is you're welcome to put comments in chat throughout the talk. And we may interrupt from time to time to let the speaker know to address your areas of interest. We definitely will have a question and answer session at the end of our talk this afternoon. So I joined with my co-host today, Dr. Robert Hisrich, who's the director of the Global Management Center at the College of Business here at Kent State University. And he and I have the great honor of teaching a course this semester with our speaker, Jens Mollbach, on tri-sector innovation, where we have student teams working with organizations around the world and also including here in Northeast Ohio. And we'll be asking towards the end of the talk if there's ways in which you would like to participate. We're looking for more organizations as we consider and hope to offer this course every year. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to, I should also say today's event is co-sponsored by the Global Management Center and Business Volunteers Unlimited in Cleveland and Akron, BVU. And we're so delighted that they joined us today in co-sponsoring this special event. So now I'll turn it over to Bob.
Thanks, David. It's a real pleasure to have you all with us today. The Global Management Center has one of its key components or pillars is sustainability. So we're very excited about how this has been growing in terms of what we've been doing, and particularly this course that now David and I are team teaching on sustainability, and particularly how do you take these principles of tri-sector innovation and apply them in a organizational setting. So we're well into the course, and the more I'm into the course, listening to Jens and learning more about it, the more I'm excited about the use of tri-sector innovation and how it can be a very, very useful tool for developing new ideas, for growing your venture, or even starting your venture. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jens to you today. Jens Mollbach, he got his BA from Yale, MBA from Stanford. After that, he went to work as a financial analyst and worked there for 4 years for Morgan Stanley. He then got the entrepreneurial spirit, which is what I love because I'm a professor, Bridgestone professor of international entrepreneurship at the university, and formed a company called Coinstar. Some of you probably have seen some of that in the stores that you shop in. And then he really saw how tri-sector innovation works, and he got tremendously excited about it, which is, to me, one of the key virtues of Jens. And he formed a new impact, and that's the organization that you can ask for help, etc., in terms of understanding this tri-sector innovation process and how to get involved with it. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jens Mollbach. Thank you for being with us, Jens, and thank you for all your help in our course.
Right. Well, thank you, Bob and David. It's been great working with you guys, and we are active in the course. I think we're on week 6 now. And we're having a lot of fun working with both of you and both the graduate and undergraduate students at Kent State. I'm going to go ahead and share some slides here. And I'm just going to double check that all of this comes up. So can someone just confirm that you're seeing a title slide?
We are.
Great, perfect. So I've given a couple of talks at Kent State this fall around tri-sector innovation. And today I'm going to be covering some of the similar ground about what tri-sector innovation is, but I'm particularly going to be talking about it from a social sector lens and even a government lens in terms of one of the case studies we're going to be looking at. But before I dive in, let's give me some background in terms of why I'm here today and kind of what's the road that led New Impact to us, New Impact and me to Northeast Ohio and to Kent State. So very briefly, I was asked to keynote at Rutgers a couple of years ago for a conference for business school deans. And many business schools are trying to figure out more innovative ways to teach business models. At that point, David's wife, Kathy from Kent State, heard me speak and invited me to come to Cleveland, where I keynoted at the at Case Western for the Prime Conference, which is an organization of around 800 schools internationally who think about the principles of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Out of that, I was invited to keynote at the Cleveland Rising Summit a year ago, fall of October 2019. And David Cooper was very excited about trying to create a framework for Cleveland and Northeast Ohio that could be similar to the SDGs, that could really help the region bond together to look at some of the challenges the region has and also find some of the opportunities. As part of that, I started working with a group of very dedicated volunteers that call themselves the Proof Team, and we launched what we call a Catalyst Project with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Tri-Sector Innovation with Rock Hall, which we'll talk about. And we're now in the midst of developing this course and co-creating it with David and Bob, which we're really excited to do. We're prototyping the course this spring, and we're looking forward to it going forward next fall. And all the student teams are actually going to be working on what we call Catalyst projects, and you'll be hearing more about those later as well. So that's why I'm here. As I've gotten to know Ohio and Northeast Ohio a little bit, I've become more aware of both some of the opportunities and the problem sets that you're facing. But I have to say one of the things that really stands out is a real dedication and willingness to tackle the issues that the region is facing. Today, I'm going to be using this term trisector a lot, and I thought we'd just start with a definition by what I mean by trisector. And I do it by telling a story of my day today, and I call it my trisector day. And I woke up this morning in my house, which was built by a private sector contractor. I made it to the bathroom. I took a shower where I was taking water from the public sector in my water district. I then went downstairs and had a cup of coffee that was certified fair trade by a nonprofit organization. So I hadn't even left my house, and I was already interacting with all three sectors in the economy. And if you think about your own days, you'll find that you interact with all three sectors all the time, even if you're not aware of it. So every time you drive on a road, that's the government who's paved the road. And anytime you log on to the internet or use the GPS system, those were actually innovations that came out of government. If you're on a sports team or a club activity, those are often organized by the nonprofit sector. So we use this way as a sort of, concept to introduce what we mean by trisector, and we also use a way to think about the people we're trying to help and the clients we're trying to serve, because they too live in trisector days. I also like to say that at New Impact, we don't focus on the what. When you think about all the issues and opportunities that are facing the region, there's lots of them. You can go through housing, transportation, education, healthcare. That is not what we do. We focus much more on the how. And we're really interested in terms of how we're going to solve these problems, and particularly how we're going to solve them at scale. And our work can really be summed up by this equation. With any organization that we work with, whether it's a for-profit company, a not-for-profit, a 501c3, a community foundation, or a government entity, anything from city, county, state, all the way up to federal, we try to think about what are they trying to solve, and are there resources that are in other sectors. We will often pick and choose specific resources from companies and align them with specific resources from nonprofits, and then specific resources with governments. And what we have found time and time again is there is a vast number of resources that already exist in society that can be utilized in different ways to actually drive powerful impact. So this is a summary of the work, and we'll be talking about the equation today as we go through the presentation. We are in the midst of COVID, so I do want to pause for a moment and just make a commentary about COVID. Our work has gotten really busy this last year, because I think that our entire country has seen the importance of banding together and the sense that we're all in this thing together. And I'm seeing lots of opportunities where companies, nonprofits, and governments are coordinating around COVID. So we've been making the case for this for a long time. And now people are really starting to see it, in their daily lives and out there. And one of the things I'd encourage you to think about in your own organizations is we're coming to believe that organizations that actually adopt tri-sector models might come back faster, stronger, better, and be more resilient with more impact. And we think that tri-sector models might be a really interesting part of the COVID recovery, but also we think what will be transforming the economy post-COVID. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a framework. This is an academic setting with a school, so I'm going to give you a framework and then a few case studies, then we'll talk about some more specific pieces. But starting with the framework, if you think about your own organizations, I'd ask you to think about some of the problems that you're facing. And often the problems that we talk about, I mentioned a few: homelessness, affordable housing, education challenges, digital divides, share a lot of characteristics that make them hard to solve. And when we think about it, we think that there's a wide variety of organizations throughout the economy that actually have resources that are useful, but we are not doing a good job in terms of optimizing the capability of what we have in society. So that's the problem as we see it. We have a solution framework, and everything we do at New Impact to solve that equation really hangs on these 4 boxes. The first box is really about repurposing existing resources. People talk a lot about spending and investment in the current state of what we have, but if you think about the balance sheet, let's just say of Northeast Ohio, there are tremendous resources that have been built by companies, by governments, and by nonprofits that already exist. And we're very interested in looking at the existing balance sheet of resources and thinking about resources that may have been built for one purpose. Could they also be used for another purpose? You don't have to reinvest in them in a sense. And then can we look at those resources and align them in creative ways to get better outcomes? We focus a lot on what we call the sustaining power of aligned interest or self-interest. For these models to work, companies need to see a self-interest, nonprofits need to see a self-interest, and governments need to see a self-interest. They don't all need to have the same self-interest, but we find for models that are going to scale and keep people at the table, we have to think deeply through the self-interest of each organization and what actually allows them to contribute the resources. And lastly, we can create common benefit through what we like to think of as market shifting strategies. So that's the framework. When we apply it well, we get some pretty powerful outcomes. We find that government organizations become more efficient, nonprofits more scalable, and companies more profitable with greater impact for all. So that's the intro on the framework. I'm going to give you a couple of case studies. Bob mentioned in the beginning that I built a company called Coinstar. I started this work in 1990 and led the company, took it public over the course of 11 years. So a lot of people are aware of the machines and what they do, but many people don't know why I started the company. And it really came out of a deep desire on my own part to actually work in all 3 sectors. I was interested in working with companies during my career. I was interested in working in the nonprofit sector, and I was interested in working in government. And when I asked people for career advice when I was in grad school or even undergrad, people often said you have to do those things separately and independently and over a period of time. And I got really interested in saying, well, can't you both do work where you can do well and do good at the same time? And that was a deep desire I had. So that thinking actually led to Coinstar. When I was in graduate school, like many of you are, I started thinking. I actually took a course in entrepreneurship and got excited about entrepreneurship. And I started thinking about common problems. And it turns out I had a jar of pennies on my dresser top that had followed me around the country. So anyway, I ended up writing to the Fed and the Mint and doing some research, and I learned that the Fed and the Mint had produced about $15 billion worth of physical coin stock to supply the US economy. I did some market research in the field and learned that about half of that money was out of circulation, so there was about $8 billion in piggy banks. Well, that meant that $7 billion actually circulated, and I'd taken a macroeconomics class, so I realized the $7 billion that circulated actually turned over 20 times a year. It created a $150 billion market. Well, that seemed like a big market to an early stage entrepreneur, so I was intrigued by that. I could create a company that would be this coin recycling company. But I also thought about the history of coins and charity, things like March of Dimes or Salvation Army with the red buckets at the holidays. or UNICEF. Some of you may have done the UNICEF Trick or Treat program at Halloween, where kids go off and collect coins in these orange boxes. But there's a long history of charities raising money from coins. So I thought, oh, maybe I could wire up the machines to accept donations. And then when I thought about the government, I realized that if Coinstar was going to be successful at scale, we'd have a huge impact on government, because we'd bring all those old coins off the dresser tops and back into circulation, and we'd actually speed up the velocity. So I realized that in creating this company, I could have impact across all three sectors, which was personally interesting, and it ended up turned out making a stronger business model. So long story short, the company worked. And when I look back on Coinstar now, 25 years later, there's been over 2 trillion coins through the network, about $60 billion processed for consumers, which is exciting. But what I'm most proud of is Coinstar really has done well in both the social sector and the government sector. So Coinstar did implement a donation feature where you could donate. It's raised over $100 million. And it saved the federal government billions. 2 quick stories on that. One, I was building the company in the mid-90s. I actually got a call from UNICEF in New York, and they said, hey, you know, we have this Trick or Treat for UNICEF program, and half the kids never send us the money after they've collected it. Can you help us? So we developed some technology with them where they could simply put a message on the back of their donation boxes that said, hey kids, you know, just take your box down to the local supermarket and dump it in the Coinstar machine. They could punch in a 4-digit code. We cut our fee in half from 8% to 4%, and we wire transferred through 96% of the funds to UNICEF, which was a huge increase in their yield, and they got way more money in. So it was very powerful for UNICEF and a real win for them. It was also good for us as a business for Coinstar, because we got more people using the machines, and we were a new company, so getting trial was important to us. So that was a win-win in terms of how that operated. And on the government side, it was interesting. A couple years after that, I actually was rolling out Los Angeles. It was our biggest rollout. I actually got a call from the Fed when I got back to Seattle, and they called me up and they said, who are you and what are you doing? The West Coast has just canceled all future penny orders. Come to Washington, D.C. and explain yourself, which I have to say was an intimidating phone call to get as a young entrepreneur, to have the Fed summon you. But the Fed really fell in love with us. They were so intrigued that this private sector company was going to create this national coin recycling program. And they quickly realized the cost savings in terms of reduced manufacturing and distribution. And they were really excited to support us. But they were also confused, because they're like, you're not a bank. We can't regulate you. You're not a customer. You're not a supplier. You know, how do we work with you? And we made the point to them that you don't have to do anything special. We are actually using an asset that you've already built, the coin system, and we're repurposing it to create consumer value. And you get the benefit of that because you've already done the hard work. So again, it was a win-win for both sides. Their support was very helpful to us. They actually helped us expand internationally to the UK. And we expanded the UK, frankly, because the Royal Mint called us up and they said, we understand you're saving the US government billions. Will you come do the same thing for us? And they were instrumental in our UK rollout because they set up all the meetings and made all the introductions. So that was the first experience I had with this, really solving this equation. And I realized that as a for-profit business, you could actually work with nonprofits and governments in a different way, where each sector could both contribute to and benefit from and actually create a stronger model. And the key thing was really thinking about what was useful to the nonprofit organization and to the government organization to create the stronger piece. So that's one story and case study. I'd like to share a second one with you. Another way to think about these models is there are often siloed resources in society. Companies, nonprofits, and governments all have powerful resources. They often don't intermix. And so if you can pick and choose from the different buckets, the specific resources that you want, and find the aligned self-interest, you can create what we call these tri-sector models that are stronger. So the second case that I want to introduce you to is a company called Propel, which has an app called Fresh EBT. The company is now about 4 years old. And the brief background is I was actually lecturing on tri-sector innovation at Stanford, and someone said, hey, there's a couple of young software guys who are doing work with the food stamp program, and they really want to create an easier way for people to get their balances done. Would you go talk to them? And I met with Jimmy and Jeff, and we started to map out sort of what they were doing in the food stamp program, and we realized that they could create a very strong and compelling tri-sector model, which has been highly successful. This thing has grown from 0 users to now over 6 million people in the last 3 years. They are available in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. They're now serving on the innovation team with the Department of Agriculture. And this solution has actually been one of the most transformative changes to a government social safety net program in government history. So let me tell you a little bit about what it does. It turns out if you're on food stamps in this country, you're one of 7 people who is food insecure. It also happens to be a large government program. So $70 billion gets handed from the Department of Agriculture to the states, which then turn around and hand the money out on debit cards to people who need support. And the average food stamp user gets about $200 a month. And what Propel figured out is that $200 a month only lasts about 2 weeks, and then they start to run out of money. So there was a need for what they call the balance checking app. So people could know how much money was on their card, so they wouldn't run out of money when they went through the supermarket to actually buy their goods. So when I met them, they had a balance checking app. But we started to think through, are there other things that would be useful to Maria, who we call the food stamp user? And we realized that there was a lot of data here and a lot of information. So it turns out when they got the balance for Maria, they also got her last 12 months of spending history. And we could use that spending history and that data so we could walk into Kroger in Cincinnati and say, hey, you know, Kroger, you have all these customers here on food stamps. Would you be willing to give them extra spending power if they, perhaps if they change stores? And we can use that data to actually be the advocate for the food stamp user to drive extra value. And today Propel is delivering, I think, $50 to $60 a month of added value to food stamp users. So it's a very compelling way for them to get additional spending power. But we also looked at public sector and social sector assets. So that middle box shows you a map that locates where the user is, and they can find stores where they can use their SNAP benefits. But they can also find farmers markets, because it turns out the federal government has a program that will double the value of food stamps spending at local farmers markets. So a food stamp user can go to the farmers market with $20 on their card and get $40 worth of fresh vegetables. That's an existing fully funded government program that's underutilized. All Propel had to do was download the database of the farmers markets and then make it available on their platform. And there are many other resources that are in government that can be useful to the food stamp user. And they did the same thing for the social sector. So if she needed to access job training or help with heating assistance or childcare, there are a myriad of 501c3s right in her neighborhood who are willing to help. And then this Propel app calls those together and essentially creates a concierge service to show her what's available. So the app's been very powerful. I think it's the #1 fintech app on the Apple Store, highly rated. And what makes it so helpful is that Maria, the food stamp user, actually goes through a tri-sector day. She interacts with companies, she interacts with governments, she interacts with the social sector, and we simply made it very easy to pull the right resources that she needed at the right time to make her day go a little bit better. It was also a really smart way for Propel to build its business, because they didn't have to invest and build all these assets themselves. They could essentially borrow and repurpose them from the other sectors, and they've attracted really compelling funding, and the company is doing really well, and as I've said up front, really transforming this part of the social safety net. They do a number of other things that I won't go through. They interact with the frequent shopper programs, the lists, there's a help piece, there's a job board, and Propel is really becoming an anti-poverty platform that's delivering significant value from all 3 sectors to people in this country. I will mention just on the last slide that I'm quite proud of is during COVID last March, Propel had information from its users far in advance of anyone else about how tough it was and how rapidly people were who were losing their jobs in this population. And they instituted a $100 million UBI program, and they were giving cash away via the app long before the COVID relief checks started flowing. So it's a really powerful platform that can do a lot of things. So those are 2 use cases. You got Coinstar and Propel. Those are for-profit companies. I'm going to get into a nonprofit here in a little bit. But if you step back and you think about what tri-sector innovation means, if you think just in Northeast Ohio, there are thousands of 501c3 programs and companies and government programs. What if we can reimagine what's in Ohio? What if we can start to harness the opportunities that exist between those sectors and repurpose and realign the assets you already have? And we often find it's helpful to get people thinking this way to ask 3 questions. And I'd ask you to ask yourself these 3 questions, depending on what organization you're in. So if you're in a company, if we have companies on the call, I would ask you, what's your private sector strategy? And you would have a good answer for me because you're running your company and you've probably been to business school or maybe even at Kent State and gotten great training. But I'd also ask you, what's your social sector strategy? How do you work with 501c3s beyond your donations in a way that is mission helpful to them and mission helpful to you? How can your resources be used by that 501c3, and does the 501c3 have resources that could be helpful to you? I then ask you, what is your government strategy? What's your public sector strategy? And often I'll get answers around lobbying or taxation or government's going to slow us down. And I have to pause and remind people and saying, no, we're actually talking about useful assets in governments that can be good for your business. And sometimes people push me on that, and I'm like, hey, I found a $150 billion market in my pocket full of pennies. Propel found a $70 billion market in a powerful database in a federal program. But these questions can also be asked if you're a social sector organization. If you're running a nonprofit in Northeast Ohio, I'd ask you, how are you working with companies? And how are you working with governments? I think I'm just getting some feedback on, does someone have their mic open? People go to mute, that would be great. Thank you. So those 3 questions are powerful, and they start to inform the work we do at New Impact. So the work we do at New Impact, we are a 501c3, we are a nonprofit, and we have 2 primary purposes. One is we're trying to teach and create this mindset of tri-sector innovation, and our goal is to have every organization to start to think this way. Can you build a stronger organization with greater impact if you start to think about tri-sector models? And then we're building practical tools and strategies and databases to help you actually find these assets and align them that can actually help drive your outcomes in a better way. So that's what we do. We have a process, and this is the process we're team teaching with David Abab at Kent State. I won't go through this in detail, but it has an inspire phase, it has an identify phase with tools and the work we're doing with it. We have an innovation phase, which we're getting into, and then an investment or a funding phase. And all 4 parts of these phases and all of the tools here are really designed to help solve that equation of using the best assets from each sector to drive greater impact. The tools we've created are designed to answer questions, and I encourage you again to think about your customers or your clients or the people that you're serving. If you're a teacher, think about the students you're serving. If you're a nonprofit, think about the clients. If you're a government official, you think about your residents or citizens. But the questions we find that are helpful for driving this sort of innovation are these. Where are there opportunities for impact in our community? And what does the community want or need? And this second question is probably the one that I hear most often right now. And we have tools called Expert Spotlighting and Community Insights that help answer those questions. Where to focus, because there's often way too many opportunities to focus on first. And where are there bottlenecks or unmet needs? And we use a tool called Impact Journeys for that. We're very interested in the team and the big team. Who are the companies and nonprofits and government entities that have resources that could be helpful for solving the problem? Where are there resources that can be leveraged and repurposed? And we have a tool called the New Impact Wiki. And lastly, we look for the aligned interests and how to strengthen existing organizations for better results and greater impact. And we use tools like the tri-sector pyramid and tri-sector equation. I'm not going to go through the tools today. That's one stuff we're doing in the course. We also have information online. But the tools act in an interactive way as part of the New Impact innovation process, and they can also work on a standalone basis. So I want to come now to what's currently happening. We are teaching these tools actively now. I mentioned we're in week 6. There are 3-person student teams that are working with 4 organizations. It's actually in 4 different impact areas. And there are opportunities for all of you to actually participate in the ongoing work that is happening right now. And I'll come to other opportunities here at the end of the presentation. The work we're doing at Kent State is really an outgrowth of the work we did over the summer here in Seattle with the University of Washington and the Seattle Foundation, which is our community foundation here. And in May, we realized that with the world being turned upside down with COVID, that we could play potentially a unique role. So we really quickly stood up 4 teams of students, and they focused on these 4 areas. The first was racial inequities. The second one was a food initiative for restaurants, which have obviously been suffering greatly during COVID. The third one was around mental health, which is really a looming crisis, potentially bigger than the pandemic itself. And the fourth was civic engagement with the upcoming election. And each of these teams worked on one of those four areas. And I'd like to share one with you today as sort of a case study for how this can be done potentially in Northeast Ohio. So this team was made up of both graduate business school students and public policy students. Full disclosure, I am on the board of the Evans School at the U and the Public Policy School. I've also done work with the business schools. And this team came together with perhaps the hardest problem of the group, and their task was to think about racial inequities, which was obviously of high importance last summer and continues to be of high importance. It's been important for long before last summer. And the area they chose to focus on was digital literacy and in the BIPOC community. So what they thought about was, and what they learned through their research was that often students in elementary schools had access to the internet, had access to Chromebooks. What they lacked was training, and these students were falling dramatically behind with the online learning and were at greater risk for falling even further behind. So this group came together, they used our process and tools, and they developed an innovation idea that is called TechCore. So they have created a small group of dedicated paid high school students and recent graduates from the community who are actually tech experts who can go and work with the families and the students and help them get on a Zoom call or use Google Classrooms, which is actually the work that's actually happening. It's been a very strong partnership that's formed between TechCore and the students and the caregivers and the Renton Public Schools. And it was all done through a tri-sector lens. So here's an example. I'm not going to go through in huge detail here of how we solve the equation for a community-based service model that's tri-sector, that is equitable, scalable, and sustainable to help solve the digital divide for these BIPOC communities. So you can see here's the public sector group, and the team members here are Renton School District and our county, King County. We have private sector organizations. We're blessed with an array of tech talent here in Seattle with Amazon, Tableau, Google, Microsoft should be on there as well. And then social sector organizations, the Boys and Girls Club, Renton Innovation Zone. And we went through each of these organizations. We found their aligned interests, and importantly, we found the resources they each had that could actually be combined to create the stronger model. And I'm really excited to say this group, it was so compelling that they got funded immediately. And TechCore is up and running and live. It's interesting, it's actually being led by the Boys and Girls Club here as a test. It's been funded by not only the Seattle Foundation, but another small foundation here in Seattle called the Medina Foundation, which works on education. And importantly, it's been funded by the county itself. So the county government is particularly interested in how it can get more support to these students much more quickly. And it's being led by Boys and Girls Club, and I mentioned, and this group called Urban Family. So it's a wonderful example of an outgrowth about how a group of students can come together, work with the community, create a solution to an urgent problem, get it funded, and actually get it up and running. And that's the same sort of thing that can happen in Northeast Ohio and beyond. Seattle Foundation is very pleased with this. They think that the process really helps them find new resources. The community foundations are feeling particularly stressed because the nonprofit funding is so skinny right now, and the COVID gap will be measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so they really do need to find other ways to fund, in addition to money, these opportunities. And we're essentially creating stronger solutions that are out there. Now, I mentioned we've also been doing work here in Ohio. So I've mentioned the Rock Hall project that's being done by the volunteer group at the Proof team. We spent a lot of time together last spring and working with Rock Hall. Rock Hall has gone through, is a 501c3 in and of itself, and it went through a closure. It's now thankfully reopened. But we looked at ways where they might be able to create virtual memberships utilizing their digital assets. We looked particularly at international opportunities where they were not focused, where they could actually, someone could experience the power of the Rock Hall content, on an iPad or on their phone. And we've explored opportunities around education and mental health, because we have found that time and time again that music transcends economic and racial classes, can actually be a real uniting force, as a unique asset that the Rock Hall has. That work is ongoing. They've actually launched their virtual membership program. They're currently working with BVU on a mobile app and actually Spanish translation. And they're doing the network weaving of tri-sector partners. Overseas, they're actually looking at foreign radio stations that are government owned, national organizations for military and vets, and also an international broadcasting company. So here the Rock Hall has been able to pull together assets from different sectors to actually create a more compelling model that will allow them to be successful not only during COVID, but beyond. This process can be used in many different ways. I've talked about startups like Propel. We've also done work with Fortune 1000 and Fortune 100 companies. We've worked with nonprofits, the United Way, local government. We're currently very active with federal agencies, and we even have private equity investors who are applying this piece. So really, no matter who you are in Northeast Ohio or what your organization is, we think there's an opportunity for you to think about your organization with a tri-sector lens and be able to solve this equation for yourself. And what we're excited by is that we can think about not only tens of organizations in Northeast Ohio, but potentially hundreds or thousands of organizations thinking this way. We think that Ohio can really up its impact and the success of each organization that moves in this direction. So there's opportunities for all of you to engage in this work. And I've listed 5 here. I'm going to go through them specifically. So if you're interested in tri-sector innovation as a project or a workshop, you can be working right now with the class. They are actually looking for people to interview and to be working with on these projects. The class is going to be repleted this fall. If your organization would like to be a host organization or have students work as essentially on a consulting project for you to help tri-sectorize your organization, that's an opportunity. And there'll also be workshops that are being held. And if you're interested in that, please contact Dr. Dubois, and you can see his email here. If you're interested in learning more about tri-sector, you can also visit our website where you can sign up for webinars and learn about tri-sector innovation. And if you're interested in helping create the ecosystem in Northeast Ohio, also ping us, because we think there's a very strong opportunity for the funding community, for the nonprofits, for the business community, organizations like BVU to come together and to really not only get a Rock Hall Catalyst project or the sum that will come out of this course, but if the region can get maybe 8 to 10 or 10 to 15 projects of your own, so you can have your own experience with this, we think it could radiate out and you could really have a lot of impact on the region. When I talk about creating an ecosystem, I just have a couple more slides I want to cover. And again, I'm going to go back to the academic setting. You may be aware of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and that is an impact framework. A lot of our work uses this framework as a way to organize the work, and you can think about this framework being applied to Northeast Ohio. The other thing that you're really fortunate to have that, frankly, as a King County resident, I'm highly envious of, is you've done great work with this Cleveland Rising Summit that you put together 1.5 years ago, where the community came together and created a number of goals and opportunity sets. And this is actually where the Proof team and the Rock Hall team came together. But if I look at your goals about economic growth and job creation, or a minority business hub, or more entrepreneurship, or being the healthiest city in the US, or creating a green city on the lake, all of these are opportunities or problems that are inherently complex and are inherently tri-sector. And I would love to see you think about standing up a Catalyst project in each one of these areas so you can get some experience yourself and become tri-sector innovators. So I'll close with that. That is my sort of overview on tri-sector innovation, and my hope and my wish that those of you who are listening are intrigued and will learn more, and that as you're doing your own work, either in your own organizations now or they're your student, is that you'll become not only a student of tri-sector innovation, but also a practitioner. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jens. It's really a delightful talk and really covered a lot of different areas and sectors that we have application to here. So please, for the audience, we have time here for some questions, so you can either put it in the chat or turn on your audio and ask.
This is Bob. Can you hear me?
Yes.
the the slides that were presented to us, Jerry, the talk this afternoon, are they available for us to go online and copy?
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll create a PDF and we will work with Kent State to have that posted in a way that you can see them.
Well, all right, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Happy to. Again, our work as New Impact, we are a 501c3, and the work we're doing, we very much envision work as a public good that can be used by anyone. So whether you're a company, a startup, or a large organization, we'd like to have access to these tools and think about it. The same thing for nonprofits, and also the same thing for governments. So we're trying to create sort of a foundation and playing field that all people can access. And that the same goes for our data tools. We're in the early stages of putting our data tools together, but our strong intent is that everyone will be able to both contribute to and benefit from those tools as well. I have a question for the group if nothing's coming in, which is I can't see what all your organizations are, but I'm curious if each of you could just think for a moment about your own work that you do and the problems you face or the opportunities that are before you. And in the chat, if you could maybe just type in one thing where you think Tri-Sector Innovation might be helpful in the work that you do. And I'm kind of curious to see what we get. So a little audience participation.
Hello, Bob.
Yes, Terry, please go ahead.
Yes, I do have a question. I was intrigued by your student teams. You mentioned 4 student teams, food insecurity, mental health, etc. Part of your model to possibly have corporate sponsors to help generate even more student teams to have an even greater impact on Northeast Ohio? Or
I'm sorry, the audio cut out halfway through the question. I just want to clarify the 4 student teams I mentioned around mental health. Those were 4 student teams that we formed last summer at the University of Washington, the Seattle Foundation, in an internship. There are 4 other student teams that are currently working in Kent State on some new issues and working with new organizations.
well, if you can hear me, my question is this, and can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, my question is this, more direct to the point. Does corporate sponsorship of maybe student teams help expand the concept through an Ohio?
I think the answer to that is yes. Currently, we've run both. This is the first time we're actually running a class during part of the academic year. And I think there's great desire, David and Bob, you can jump in here, to work with corporations directly. But there's also the opportunity for summer internships, which we've been discussing, which we've run in the past. Those tend to be paid internships, and so sponsorship for paid internships where students could work things would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
And we can expand that a little bit by even saying also for organizations to serve as sponsors of projects.
Yeah.
There's zero financial cost to that. The time cost usually runs about, we ask for 6 one-hour meetings and then 6 or 8 30-minute interviews, and then a coordinator from the organization who responds to emails. So the footprint of participation in the project isn't that great. But the opportunity for impact certainly is.
And again, this course at Kent State is new, so we're not sure exactly where it's going, but if I was to dream a little bit, I would say as Kent State develops this capability and students see the power of it, right? I think it's the best course you can take, but I'm biased with it. That, potentially every semester there are student teams who might be working with 10 different organizations in Northeast Ohio, which is a great bond from the university, the community for student learning, and the organizations can also learn. You could also think about it the other way, where the university could say, hey, we really want to tackle, if one of our biggest issues in Ohio is perhaps job retention or job creation post-COVID, how can we really think about tri-sector solutions for job skilling, upskilling, those sort of things? You come at it from an impact lens, which I think could be quite powerful.
And in fact, I'll add into the chat my email. I would really appreciate if you have interest even in exploring the idea, you would email me and let me know, and then which of the interests or which of the applications in particular that you had an interest in, whether it's to be interviewed, to host a student team, to address tri-sector applications to your organization, or to participate in a workshop where we hosted who's on the team for a particular impact area, such as job creation or homelessness or whichever area we picked.
Yeah.
So I'll add that now to the chat. So any of those interested in that, please do contact me.
Yeah, and I would say this who's on the team question we find to be one of the most powerful questions we ask, because often the team is much bigger than people realize, and people who are on the team don't even know they're on the team, and they don't even realize that some of the resources they've already built can be used for other purposes. So that's one of the fun things about the process, is the sense of discovery and almost abundance about finding things that can be useful and creating ways for people to engage.
Yes, you might even mention the OnStar example as an example of unexpected resources finding interesting repurposing.
Yeah, so David's referencing a story. We've done some work with General Motors and with the University of Michigan, and we had interns from both the Ross School of Business and Ford School of Public Policy, and we'd been sponsored by GM to take a look at its tri-sector opportunities. Anyway, as part of that, we were looking at General Motors resources, and one of the things they have is their OnStar system. For those of you familiar with GM, you can sit in the car and hit the blue button on the dashboard and make a restaurant reservation or talk to a concierge or get directions. But as we learned more about it, we were struck by how powerful it was. Something I knew was that if the car gets in the crash and the airbags go off, the OnStar system will automatically call the first responder and transmit the geolocation and call the aid car. What I didn't know is that GM had placed sensors in the car that'll actually transmit the telemetry of the crash, so they could actually say, hey, first responders, be prepared for head injuries. So that was interesting. But we were in their global command center one day, and we're standing there, and these calls are coming in from FEMA because it was Hurricane Harvey down in Texas. Interesting kind of timing on that. And I asked, what's FEMA doing calling General Motors? And they're like, oh, well, during Hurricane Harvey, the cell tower network went down. And FEMA first responders use GM cars because we use our entire car as an antenna, and we create a roving mesh communications network, and we create the backbone. So I'm like, well, how interesting that the federal government's FEMA didn't have to build its own communications backbone. It can just actually run to the General Motors car. That was an unexpected resource that the government got to use for no investment. But the one that really struck me is I asked them what else they do, and they said, well, all of our OnStar advisors are trained in suicide prevention. So I was like, tell me more. And they said, well, what we have found is that returning vets often have a brand affiliation for a Chevy pickup. So I don't know why, but returning vet goes together with a Chevy pickup. And if that vet gets into mental trouble through PTSD or other issues, they are less likely to call 911 or call the crisis hotline, but they will sit in their pickup and they'll hit the blue button and they'll call General Motors. So GM is on the front lines for suicide prevention, and they're doing it because it's the right thing to do. But we talked to the mental health community, and they're like, oh my God, 17% of the cars on the road have a suicide prevention device. How can we help GM train and add our resources to make this even more powerful and better? So that's a classic case of the private sector having a resource that's super helpful to both government and social sectors. And I have oodles of stories like that with sort of what I call buried or hidden assets in other sectors that I'm happy to share. But I know David remembers that one. I mean, it's what I did with Coinstar, right? I found a $150 billion market in my pocket full of pennies. Propel finds this amazing database on this $70 billion government program that most people think was tired and old school. It's now one of the most innovative programs out there, and they didn't have to do anything really different. They already had the structure there. They just had to think about it differently and then apply it differently. So I put a question out about what was on people's minds. I think I've seen exactly 0 answers in the chat. I gotta believe that someone in some organization has some problem where this might be potentially interesting. So I don't want to call people out, but I would love just to hear what people are working on, or what are the big challenges or opportunities that you're facing in your organizations in Ohio. You don't have to have solutions. I'm just curious what the issue area is.
Now, I know a lot of you, and I know you're not that shy, so join in.
I'm also happy to answer more questions while people are thinking about what they want to share, or just have a conversation.
So we have a couple now. Are you able to see those, Jens?
I am. So, so low-income affordable housing, HUD family self-sufficiency programs are expensive, not particularly productive. This is the whole. I think HUD and Section 8 housing is really important, and frankly, it's a catalyst project and an issue area that we would love to dive into. I can give you one example around housing data that's real. So there's a company in New Jersey. We were funded by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to work with Rutgers, and we had teams of Rutgers business students, and we embedded with actually a venture capital firm called Newark Venture Partners, which was doing local investment. Anyway, long story short, we ran into a company, very early stage company called Mocafy, who was really interested in lending into Black and brown urban communities who are really stuck with payday lenders and high cost solutions. Being poor is very expensive. And what they realized is that a lot of their clients who they're trying to serve were using Section 8 HUD vouchers, which are essentially, it's a $45 billion spending program. And what they realized is that if those people use those HUD dollars to pay their rent on time, their credit was actually better, even though it wasn't their own money, but the consistency of the rent payment said something about their credit, which the credit rating agencies haven't done. So they've created an app and a lending tool that uses that HUD data to actually create a lending program that's cheaper for them. So they're creating this very interesting tool based on housing data. That's not an actual solution on housing itself, but I wanted to mention it when I saw the HUD thing come up. But yeah, so I would say 100% it would be super interesting to engage in an affordable housing thing and think about not only HUD's resources, but the state's resources, county resources, city resources, builders, those sort of things, and see if we can't unlock some solutions. I see one here. Thank you for the comment. There is a lot to unpack. I agree. I'd just say, even though there's a lot here, I'd just say think about that equation. How do we use the best from the private sector, the social sector, and the public sector? And it's very much of this sense we're all in this thing together, and let's use the best resources we have as a society and not limit ourselves to one sector's resources to solve problems. You know, as an aside, we're actually doing work with OMB, Office of Management and Budget, right now. And we're encouraged the federal government to think about solutions for residents or citizens that not only uses the best federal assets, but obviously other government assets, but to also take a tri-sector approach to thinking about solving solutions for citizens as Propel has done. The next comment's around COVID. Our work is remote. Many employees realizing that in-person work is not necessary anymore. Yeah, I hear that a lot. Is that a question about how to solve for that, or is that just a market trend that's happening? I don't know, Marissa, if you want to elaborate more on that. I don't know if she's still on, but I think that's an interesting area to explore. And I know some corporations are worried that employees don't want to come back. There may be tri-sector solutions to encourage employees to come back, or there might be large shifts in at-home work. And if you just think about the impact on societal resources without home work on transportation, food distribution, restaurants, it's enormous what we're going through. I think it'd be really interesting to study the implications of at-home work on all these impact areas. Okay, we have another one here. Social supports children in poverty, makes it difficult to families to access them. Health and dental in an area, food support in the other, behavior in another. There are many times being parked in the school which has not always been affected. There has to be. I completely agree. We look at a lot of these programs, and I mentioned that tri-sector day. When we map out the tri-sector day of, let's say, a family with a young child, I mentioned before, it's expensive before, it's also just difficult from a timing and a coordination standpoint. So one of the things we've been brainstorming is, can't there be a common app for benefits? Can't there be a central way to do this? And frankly, it's been interesting to me, if you think about COVID, how effectively we've been able to use pharmacies and other private sector distribution centers for actually getting vaccines out. And we're not relying strictly on public sector distribution centers. So I think that question of ease of access will be powerful, but it's got to be done with a human-centered design, a customer experience design, and a tri-sector lens to really come up with the best solutions to support these kids. That would be another fascinating Catalyst project. That would be a great thing to research and pilot and actually launch in Akron or Cleveland or really anywhere and learn from it and scale it out. Love to work on that one.
One thing you may not know about Northeast Ohio, Jens, is that we have one of the highest densities of nonprofits in the U.S. And well, we have more questions, but I was going to have you expand on the wiki as a great way to learn who's on the team.
Yeah, so let me, we've got another 3 minutes on the call, David.
Sure.
Is that right? So let me just quickly go through these. Marissa, I saw your mic wasn't working. Traveling in person really hurting. Yeah, I think it's a really important area, Marissa, and I think what the solution sets are, it's certainly worthy of trying to figure out solutions. Margaret, I'm going to quickly here, clean water at low energy cost. Water is one of my favorite topics. Water typically is developed by the public sector and by districts, which are really interesting. There's a myriad of water systems in the country and a myriad of data. And it is begging for a more powerful solution. And that's not only a U.S. issue, that's very much of a global issue. So I think that, you know, if you think about, if we want to be able to turn on our taps and get clean water, what does that look like? I know when we were working in Newark, it was heartbreaking to learn that 25% of 6-year-old kids had lead poisoning. Now, most of that came from paint. But lead in water is still an issue in many, many communities, as I'm sure it is somewhere in Northeast Ohio. What about cross-regional examples? People who want to move out west due to move out of the west due to the fires. Yeah, so I think job attraction and brain drain is a very powerful impact area. A lot of communities, in fact, one of the teams that we're working with at Kent State is thinking about this issue a lot. So how do you become an innovation hub and create sort of economic opportunities? That could be really interesting. I see a comment about biomimicry. I'm just going to go quickly because we got 2 minutes left. David asked me to say something about the wiki. I showed you a suite of tools, and there's 6 primary tools that we use as part of this process. They all have various forms of data. The wiki is the tool we use to answer the question of who's on the team and what are their resources. So already in Ohio, we have, I think there's 76,000 501c3s in Ohio as a state. We've already uploaded all of those, and we have them sort of initially organized by impact area. So you can say who's on the team for good health that's out there. We are adding companies and we are adding government entities to this, and this will be a publicly available tool. We would love to work with Kent State and others to get this information out there so it's accessible to everybody. We think it's a really cool tool and helps people find who has information, who has resources. Regenerative agriculture, I see popping up there. Huge fan of regenerative agriculture, soil, climate change, health, local economy, economic development, it is ripe with tri-sector opportunities. In fact, that's also a little bit similar to one of the projects we're working on at Kent State right now.
Mhm. Well, I think you can all see why I was so excited about having teaching with Jens. He's been a great asset for us in the classroom, and our 4 teams are doing some exceptionally good work. You've heard of the output of 3 of the 4 teams or what they're working on. And I just want to close with thanking Jens for taking time to bring us up to date on tri-sector innovation and what New Impact is doing. And suggest for all of you, if you're a student, think about taking the course. David and I are having a lot of fun teaching it, and our students are learning a lot, not only about how to do research for companies, both globally as well as is here in Ohio, but also this whole new idea of tri-sector innovation, which fascinates me, and I'm sure is going to be used more and more and more as people learn how beneficial it is. If you're a company, we'd love to have you sponsor one of the projects for next fall. And if you're a nonprofit organization, we'd love to have work with you as well as any governmental agencies. So on behalf of the Global Management Center, David and Jens and myself, please keep in touch and either email David or myself in terms of if you have any ideas or thoughts. And Jens, we look forward to class tomorrow. Thank you all for attending.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye now.